Okay, I've been meaning to do this video for a while. Please excuse the mess. I got my dog in the back, that's a bear. I had everything stacked up really nice on top of the toilet paper, and it went to shit as soon as I got out of the parking lot. I thought it was more stable. Anyway, aside from that, I've been living in Mexico for a little over 3 years now. And I get a lot of questions, and the most common question I get is, what do you do about safety? Do you feel safe? What about all the homicides? All of that kind of stuff. And to be honest, when I first moved here, I moved here because I really enjoyed the beach. It was about one of the only places I could truly feel like I could relax. And I moved here so I could get good access to the beach. So I live in Playa del Carmen. I'm, within a few minutes of the beach. I could ride a bike, I could walk, and I've, basically spent a lot of time on the beach, just kind of relaxing. Not as much time as I'd like or as I used to, but it's a great place to live. Right now I'm in Cancun. I'm coming back from the Costco, and there's a lot of traffic here. Cancun is a very popular place for people to live. If you catch view of some of the cars that you'll see behind me, maybe the cars here, you would not know that you're living in Mexico. Mexico has the fastest growing middle class of any large country, and everybody's driving nicer cars here typically than you would see in the United States. So anyway, going back to safety, it's the most common question I get. If you look at the homicide rate in Mexico, it is fairly high. It's probably 3 to 4 times higher than what you see in the United States, and I know that's alarming. However, if you were to take the amount of fentanyl, overdoses in the United States, and you're saying, okay, if somebody dies of a fentanyl overdose, then they are essentially being poisoned, and you were to add those, 80 to 100,000 deaths back into the U.S. as homicide rates, then the U.S. actually has a higher homicide rate than Mexico. And I know a lot of you will say, well, those don't really count because those are drug addicts, and they don't pertain to the general population. Okay, you can make that argument, but then I get to make the argument that 80% of the homicides in Mexico are cartel on cartel violence, and so they don't really apply to me because I'm not in the cartel or doing cartel activities, right? So if you look at the numbers for tourists, the homicide rate is less than 1 per 100,000, right? So you get 20 million people here every year, less than 20 of those are being murdered. Most of them are due to cartel activities anyway, but it's less than 20. The rate is less than 1 per 100,000. If you look at the people that live here, the rate is about 2 per 100,000. So and that's all foreigners, not just Americans. But if you look at that, it's about homicide rate's about 2 per 100,000. There's about 2 to 3 million people living here from the United States. So you don't see those kind of numbers in the United States. You can go to the safest, states in the United States. You're not going to see homicide rates below 2. It just doesn't happen. So from a homicide rate standpoint, you're much safer in Mexico. When you look at rapes, rapes are typically on average 10 times higher in the United States, and they're getting worse than they are in Mexico. Aggravated assault is higher in the United States. Home break-ins higher in the United States. Kidnappings are actually higher in the United States. Missing persons are 10 times higher in the United States. So when you look at all of these crimes, it's much safer to live in Mexico. But the media has blown everything out of proportion. The social media has blown everything out of proportion. Even when I talk to AI, so I talk to Perplexity.ai a lot, and I ask Perplexity, okay, what are the safest cities in North America? It doesn't mention one city in Mexico. But when you look at the crime statistics, Mexico actually has, I think, 5 of the top, say, 12 safest cities in all of Latin America. If you look at cities over 1 million population, Merida is the safest city in all of North America. Yet when I asked the AI, particularly Perplexity.ai, I said, what's the safest city in North America with over 1 million residents? The AI says it's San Jose. And then I go on to ask the AI, okay, compare San Jose's homicide rate, crime statistics with Merida's. And it basically says, yeah, you're right. Merida's crime statistics are higher, but there's problems in Mexico, it says. And it gives you all of these subjective measures that, crime rates increasing, homicide rates are increasing, and kidnapping rates are increasing. None of that is true. I mean, none of that is true. It's really sad. And then you got all these social media people going on and on about how Mexico is in a state of chaos because they just had all of these protests against the president. There was one protest against the government. One protest. It was in Mexico City. They wanted to protest throughout the country, and people weren't supported. The president of Mexico has one of the, if not the highest approval rating of any president in the world. So she has an approval rating depending on which poll you look at, between like 71.8% and 79%. So she has arguably an 80% approval rating. There's no leader in the free world that has an approval rating that high. So Mexico is not in a state of chaos. People are not wanting her out. People are not, thinking that she's in bed with the cartels. It's possible the cartels helped fund her. I think the cartels have probably helped fund every sitting Mexican president and probably most sitting U.S. presidents in the last 50 years. But, she's doing a very good job. I know people, think she's a communist, and if you look at some of their party's values, you would get that impression. I get that, but she's not acting and putting all of these systems in place that would basically move communism ahead. They're actually, I would say, more capitalistic here in Mexico than we are in the United States. In the United States, everybody's getting handouts. No matter where you're from, you get a handout. You get a handout if you're a foreigner. You get a handout if you're an alcoholic. You get a handout if you have anxiety, right? That stuff does not happen in Mexico. Everybody kind of fends for themselves. And ironically, you don't have the homeless problem here either. So in the United States, you see homeless people everywhere. You don't see that in Mexico. So it just baffles my mind to see people rant and go on social media, and everybody's basing their comments and their opinions on hearsay, and they believe all of the hype that they're seeing on social media, on the press, what doesn't matter. And in reality, this is the safest place I've ever lived. I've lived in rural Ohio. I've lived in cities in California. I've lived in rural New Mexico. I've lived all over the United States, Colorado, Chicago, Florida. This is literally the safest place that I've ever lived. I leave my wallet in my car periodically along with the keys. It's unlocked. Don't do it intentionally, but I never have a problem. And yeah, I live in a nice neighborhood. So you could argue, well, you live in a nice neighborhood. True. Show me nice neighborhoods in the United States where you can leave your keys and your wallet in there and not have to worry about it being parked in your driveway. It's just extremely safe. There's been plenty of times I've went to the gym and I've left my wallet in the car unlocked, and I go to the gym in a downtown, very public area, and no one ever checks my doors to make sure they're locked. You can't say that in most places in the United States. You don't have carjackings in Mexico. You don't have school shootings in Mexico. You don't have a lot of the home invasions in Mexico. It's just a way different culture. People think of the cartels, and I try to tell people, as long as you're not doing cartel activity, so as long as you're not, moving people illegally, or you're not, selling women illegally, or you're not moving drugs, then you're going to have a pretty good, time in Mexico. So anyway, that's just my overview from living here. And it's not just from living in the tourist area. I don't spend much time in the tourist area in Playa del Carmen. I know Playa del Carmen in general is a tourist area. But I spend a lot of my time amongst the locals. I do all my shopping out there. I do most of my eating out there when I go to dinner. My haircut I get, in the local community. So I'm out in the local community a lot, and I'm not always in the nice tourist area or the nice gated communities. It's just a very safe place to live, and I don't think people really understand that. And I don't know why the United States is so hell-bent on making Mexico look bad. But every measure you look at with Mexico, it's just kicking ass. The crime here, I know we have the cartels feeding into the United States. If the United States didn't have such a thirst for drugs and prostitution, we wouldn't have such a problem with the cartels in Mexico. But even with all of that going on, if you stay out of that lane and you're not involved in that, Mexico is probably going to be the safest place you've ever lived as well. I talked to women here that have lived here for 50 years. Never had one problem. Never had one person even speak to them inappropriately. Hell, in the United States, verbal assault, sexual assault, stuff like that's going on all of the time. You don't have hate crimes going on here. People are not being, beat to death or beat to an inch of their life because of their color of their skin. It just doesn't happen here. I don't see people that are homosexuals getting beat because they're homosexuals. It's a very accepting community. It's also a very religious community. It's a very Catholic community. People are very family oriented. It's just a wonderful place to live, and it's not all hot and desert. I used to think Mexico was like, the hottest parts of Arizona all over. Most of the people in Mexico live above, 5,000 feet in elevation. They live in the mountains. Another good portion of people in Mexico live within, 20 to 30 miles of a coastline, of a beach, of an ocean. And very few live in the desert population. So the climate here is much more mild, I think, than what people would realize. And, a lot of people are living in paradise here. So anyway, just wanted to get that off my chest. I see all these influencers out there making really bad statements about Mexico. It really irritates me because I don't think they've ever been to Mexico. And it's just frustrating to see all that. So Mexico is a much better place. If you're thinking about retiring here in Mexico, I would say go for it. It is a wonderful place to live. And you couldn't ask for friendlier people and better food. So anyway, let me know what you think, and everybody take care.